Think and Grow Rich, a practical guide. What Napoleon Hill actually meant and why it hasn't worked for most people. Written and narrated by Pharaoh B. Introduction. Before we begin, you have probably heard of this book. Maybe you read it years ago. Maybe you skimmed the highlights. Maybe someone quoted it at you in a way that made you roll your eyes. The universe will provide. Think positive. Desire equals destiny. And part of you believed it and part of you tried it, and most of you found that it did not work the way they said it would. So you put the book down, filed it somewhere between useful and fraud, moved on with your life, kept doing what you were doing, kept getting what you were getting. Here is what I want you to consider. The problem was not the book. The problem was the translation. Think and Grow Rich has been quoted, misquoted, distorted, and stripped of its structure for almost a century. People pull lines out of context and paste them on social media as if fortune were a feeling. Desire it enough and it will come. See it and believe it. Thoughts become things. That is not what Napoleon Hill said. That is what people who skimmed the book remember. And what people remember tends to be whatever requires the least effort. Hill was not selling magic. He was describing a system, a chain of cause and effect, a process where desire leads to planning, planning leads to action, action is sustained by persistence, and persistence is supported by a network of minds working in harmony toward a shared purpose. None of that happens by wishing. What Hill observed across 25 years and more than 500 successful men was not a shortcut. It was a pattern, and patterns can be followed, but only if you understand how they work. So let us begin again, not with enthusiasm, not with belief, with clarity. This series will take you through every principle Hill taught, chapter by chapter, idea by idea, stripped of the distortions, restored to the method. Some of it will challenge what you have been told. Some of it will name what you already knew but could not explain. All of it will be practical because ideas that cannot be applied are just decoration. I am not here to convince you of anything. I am here to show you what the book actually says, and then you can decide what to do with it. Lecture 1. The setup. What Hill was actually trying to teach. Most people skip the introduction. They want the secret. They want the formula. They want to jump straight to the part where money starts showing up. Hill knew this, so he did something deliberate. He spent the entire opening of the book slowing you down. He asked you a question. What do you want most? Not in passing, not as a warm-up. He asked because the whole system depends on how clearly you answer. And he was not being friendly about it. Hill did not write Think and Grow Rich to make you feel good. He wrote it to make you work. He called it a textbook, not a motivational speech, not a collection of stories meant to inspire. A textbook. That word was chosen carefully. A textbook implies structure. It implies study. It implies that you will be asked to return, to underline, to test the material against your own thinking. Hill was not trying to sell hope. He was trying to install a method, and the method, from the very first page, requires patience. He tells you the book cannot be absorbed quickly. He warns against speed because speed encourages consumption instead of digestion. Most people treat information like entertainment. Hill wanted you to treat this book like a discipline. So what was he actually teaching? The philosophy does not replace knowledge, skill, or effort. It organizes them. That is the line most people miss. Hill was not telling you that if you believe hard enough, the work disappears. He was telling you that many people already possess information, training, and ability, but still fail to convert those assets into useful service or adequate compensation. The failure is not a lack of intelligence. It is a lack of organization. That is what the book is meant to supply. He introduces the mastermind early, before you even understand what it means, because he wants you to see how the successful men he studied actually operated. When faced with problems, they did not isolate themselves. They conferred, they exchanged ideas freely until a workable plan emerged. This is not mysticism, this is practical intelligence. This is the difference between struggling alone in your head and building a system that includes other minds. Hill's instructions for forming a study group are specific. Chapters are to be read slowly. Members are to prepare in advance. Notes are to be taken. Ideas are to be captured, especially the ones that arrive during discussion with others. Even reading aloud matters because tone affects comprehension and engagement. Why would a book about wealth spend so much time on how to read it? Because Hill was modeling the behavior he wanted you to adopt. This book was not meant to be consumed in isolation or treated as private inspiration. It was meant to be engaged, challenged, tested, and integrated through structured effort. The promise is not certainty, it is likelihood. Persistent application of the method, Hill says, makes you almost certain to uncover the formula that Andrew Carnegie used to build his fortune. Not by imitating surface actions, by understanding the organizing principles beneath them. So before we go any further, let us be clear about what you are getting into. This is a system. It requires definition, patience, cooperation, and responsibility. It does not offer shortcuts. It does not flatter you. It assumes you are intelligent, skeptical, and willing to work. If that sounds like what you were looking for, then we can continue. If you wanted someone to tell you that all you need is a positive attitude, this is not going to be comfortable. Either way, the choice is yours. Lecture 2. Desire, the starting point of all achievement. Let us start with the word everyone uses, but almost no one defines. Desire, you hear it all the time. Follow your desires, know what you want, manifest your dreams, and most people nod along because it sounds true and it feels good. But here is the problem. Most people do not actually know what they want. They know what sounds nice. They know what would be better than what they have. They know what they would not say no to if it fell in their lap. But when you ask them to name in specific terms the one thing they are willing to organize their entire life around, they cannot do it. Hill knew this. That is why he did not treat desire as a feeling. He treated it as a force, and not just any force, the initiating force, the thing that has to come first, or nothing else in the system can follow. Desire, as Hill describes it, is not wishing. It is not preference. It is not a passing appetite that rises and falls with mood. It is the thing that does not go away, the thing that organizes behavior, the thing that keeps you moving toward a goal even when evidence tells you to stop. That is what makes it different from ordinary wanting. Ordinary wanting gives up when circumstances turn difficult. Desire continues. Ordinary wanting fades when delay stretches too long. Desire stays fixed. Ordinary wanting adjusts itself to match what seems realistic. Desire insists on the original goal even when reality argues against it. Hill uses Edwin Barnes to illustrate the difference. Barnes wanted to become Thomas Edison's business associate, not his employee, not someone who worked under him, his associate. That is a ridiculous goal when you look at the starting conditions. Barnes had no money. He did not know Edison personally. He had no experience that qualified him. He had to travel by freight train just to get to the man's laboratory. When he arrived, Hill says he looked like a tramp, but Hill insists that his thoughts were those of a king. This is not poetry. This is a claim about how internal direction shapes external behavior. Barnes did not wait until conditions improved before acting. He did not delay until his circumstances matched his ambition. He moved immediately toward the only thing he was determined to have. And when Edison asked him what he wanted, Barnes did not hedge. He said he had come to go into business with him. Now, Edison did not hand him a partnership that day, of course not. Edison gave him a minor job, something menial, something anyone could do. And here is where most people would have failed. most people would have accepted the job and started looking for something better elsewhere. Most people would have interpreted the gap between where they were and where they want to be as proof that the goal was unrealistic. Most people would have drifted. Barnes did not. He stayed for 5 years doing unimportant work, receiving no promise, no encouragement, no special recognition. But in his own mind, he never stopped being Edison's future partner. And when the opportunity appeared, and when Edison invented the dictating machine and none of the salesmen wanted to touch it, Barnes recognized it because his mind had been prepared, because he was not looking for just any break. He was looking for the one break that matched his purpose. He asked for the chance to sell the machine. He got it. He succeeded so well that Edison gave him a national contract, and the partnership finally became real. Here's what Hill wants you to understand. Barnes did not get lucky. He positioned himself in proximity to his goal and stayed there until the opportunity matched the preparation. Desire in Hill's system is what creates that positioning. It is what keeps you in motion when nothing external is rewarding you. It is what keeps you alert to opportunities that other people miss because their attention is scattered. And desire is not something you either have or you do not. It can be cultivated. Hill gives 6 steps. Read them slowly because this is the method. 1, fix in your mind the exact amount of money you desire. Not a vague amount, not a lot, not enough to be comfortable. An exact number. 2, determine exactly what you intend to give in return for the money you desire. There is no such reality, Hill says, as something for nothing. 3, establish a definite date when you intend to possess the money you desire. 4, create a definite plan for carrying out your desire and begin at once, whether you are ready or not, to put this plan into action. 5, write out a clear, concise statement of the amount of money you intend to acquire. Name the time limit. State what you intend to give in return and describe clearly the plan through which you intend to acquire it. 6, read your written statement aloud twice daily, once just before retiring at night and once after arising in the morning. As you read, see and feel and believe yourself already in possession of the money. Now, before you dismiss this as magical thinking, notice what Hill is actually asking you to do. He is asking you to be specific, not hopeful, specific. He is asking you to define an exchange. Not to receive something for nothing, but to identify the service or value you intend to provide. He is asking you to set a deadline, not someday, a date. He is asking you to begin immediately, not when you feel ready, now. He is asking you to write it down, because writing is the first act of transmutation. It takes something vague in your head and gives it shape in the world. And he is asking you to repeat it, not because the words are magic, but because repetition is how a goal stops being an occasional thought and starts being a dominant influence. This is not manifesting, this is programming. Hill is describing the deliberate installation of a purpose into the part of your mind that governs behavior over time. He's describing how to make a desire so dominant that it reorganizes how you perceive opportunities, how you respond to setbacks, and how long you persist. Most people fail, Hill says, because their desires are weak, not because they are unlucky, not because they lack talent, because their desires are not strong enough to generate the planning, action, and persistence required to convert thought into result. And here's the part that separates Hill from the people who quote him without understanding. He does not promise that desire alone will produce results. Desire in his structure is the starting point. It is not the finish line. It is the force that initiates the process, sustains attention, and drives planning. But without planning, desire becomes fantasy. Without action, planning becomes entertainment. Without persistence, action becomes scattered motion. Desire is not a wish, it is the engine. But an engine without a vehicle goes nowhere. Lecture 3, Faith, the state of mind that keeps desire from collapsing. You can want something intensely. You can write it down. You can say it aloud every morning and every night and still fail, not because the method is broken, but because something inside you does not believe it will work. And that disbelief shows up in how you behave when resistance appears. Hill calls the solution faith, but he does not mean what you probably think he means. Faith, in the way most people use it, is a vague feeling of hope. It is the sense that things will probably work out. It is what people reach for when they do not want to think too hard about what might go wrong. Hill is describing something else entirely. Faith in his system is a mental state, not a feeling, a state, something that can be cultivated, installed, and directed. Something that changes how the mind processes information and sustains effort over time. He calls it the head chemist of the mind. Without faith, desire remains unstable. It fluctuates, it argues with itself. One day you believe, the next day you question, the next week you stop, and then months later you wonder why nothing ever comes together. Faith is what stabilizes desire long enough for it to organize into plan, and plan into action, and action into result. But here is the part people miss. Faith is not something you either have or do not have. Faith can be manufactured. Hill says it plainly. Faith may be induced by repeated instructions to the subconscious mind, not by argument, not by hope, through repetition. He uses an unsettling example to explain how this works. A man does not become a criminal all at once. At first there is revulsion, then tolerance, then acceptance, then identification. The mind becomes accustomed to what it repeatedly encounters. It starts to believe what it keeps hearing. The same process, Hill says, works in the opposite direction. If you repeat a purpose long enough, with enough emotional engagement, the mind begins to accept it as real. Belief follows repetition. This is not self-deception in the shallow sense. This is recognizing that the mind does not come preloaded with confidence. Confidence must be built, and it is built the same way any habit is built, through practice. Hill identifies 3 emotions as especially powerful in this process: faith, love, sex. He groups them together, not to be provocative, but to make a point about intensity. These emotions mobilize the whole person. When thought is mixed with one of these emotions, it moves, it acts, it persists. A thought without emotion rarely produces sustained behavior. A thought saturated with emotion reorganizes priorities, attention, and persistence. So when Hill tells you to read your statement aloud and feel yourself already in possession of the goal, he is not asking you to pretend. He is asking you to practice certainty until certainty becomes your default. And this changes more than you think. Hill says that faith affects how the subconscious receives instruction. Thought alone can be entertained and discarded, but thought mixed with faith passes into the subconscious, where it becomes automatic, where it shapes behavior even when you're not consciously directing it. This is why 2 people can follow the same steps and get different results. One person reads the statement while secretly doubting. The doubt enters the instruction. The subconscious receives a message contaminated by hesitation, and hesitation is what gets executed. The other person reads the statement with growing certainty, built through repeated engagement. The instruction enters the subconscious clean, and the subconscious acts upon it. Hill calls this voluntary self-suggestion. You are not waiting for belief to appear. You are building it. He warns that the same law works in reverse. If you rehearse fear with feeling, fear becomes dominant. If you rehearse limitation with conviction, limitation becomes your ceiling. The subconscious does not care whether the instruction is helpful. It accepts what it is given. This is not punishment, this is process. And the practical implication is clear. You cannot afford to leave your mind unguarded. If you do not deliberately plant purposes and beliefs, your mind will be planted by accident, by environment, by conversation, by the fears that sneak in when you are not paying attention. He'll insist that many people who believe they are doomed are not victims of fate, they are victims of belief. Negative faith in limitation, rehearsed until it governs. So, what does faith actually look like in practice? It looks like someone who acts with certainty even before the evidence arrives, not recklessly, not blindly, but without the constant internal negotiation that weakens persistence. Heal includes a self-confidence formula in this chapter. It is not decoration. It is a tool. Each line reinforces responsibility, ethical exchange, persistence, and belief. He ties success explicitly to truth, justice, and service because he understood that negative motives eventually undermine persistence. You cannot sustain faith in something you know is wrong. That is why Hill's version of faith is not a trick. It is alignment. Your conscious goal must be something your subconscious can support without conflict. Otherwise, the whole process fractures under pressure. Faith, in Hill's system, is what keeps desire alive long enough to matter. Without it, every delay becomes a reason to quit. Every setback becomes proof of failure. Every gap between where you are and where you want to be becomes an invitation to lower your expectations. With faith, delay is just delay. Setback is just feedback. And the gap is simply the distance you are crossing. That is the difference between people who drift and people who arrive. They were not handed different circumstances. They held different beliefs. And they held them long enough to act on them. Lecture 4. Autosuggestion, the bridge between thought and action. You have heard this word before. Autosuggestion, self-talk, affirmations, and you probably associate it with people standing in front of mirrors telling themselves they are successful while nothing in their life changes. That is not what Hill was describing. Autosuggestion in his system is not decoration. It is mechanism. It is the means by which an idea is carried from the conscious mind, where it can be entertained and abandoned, into the subconscious mind, where it becomes a habit of thought, and through that habit, a habit of action. Hill defines it plainly. Autosuggestion is self-suggestion. It includes all suggestions and stimuli that reach the mind through the 5 senses. It is the agency of communication between the conscious thinking mind and the subconscious, which he calls the seat of action. That last phrase matters. The conscious mind decides, but it does not always execute. The subconscious mind executes, but it does not always decide. Autosuggestion is the means by which decision is handed over to the part of the mind that actually performs. And this is where most people fail. They read the instructions, they agree with them, they intend to follow them, and then they return to routine. The desire never becomes dominant. The plan never becomes persistent. The goal fades into a vague hope that gets mentioned occasionally and then forgotten. Hill says this happens because people treat autosuggestion as a mechanical recital. They speak words without feeling. They repeat statements without belief. They go through the motions while their inner state remains unchanged. And the subconscious does not respond to words alone. The subconscious recognizes and responds to thoughts that are well mixed with emotion. If you repeat an affirmation 1,000,000 times without faith and feeling, your subconscious will not act upon it. The words are not the signal. The feeling behind the words is the signal. This is the central corrective to the shallow use of autosuggestion. Words spoken without conviction do not become dominant. They sit on the surface. They compete with 1,000 other thoughts. They lose. But words spoken with feeling pass through the gate. They enter the subconscious. And once they are accepted there, they begin to shape perception, behavior, and decision automatically. So how do you speak with feeling? Hill connects this directly to the 6 steps in the chapter on desire. Read your written statement aloud twice daily, once at night and once in the morning. As you read, see and feel and believe yourself already in possession. That is not a ritual, that is training. You are teaching your subconscious what to work on. You are saturating your mind with the specific goal until that goal becomes the dominant influence. Hill gives an exercise. Close your eyes. Fix in your mind the exact amount of money you desire. Concentrate until you can actually see the physical appearance of the money. As you do this, see yourself in possession and see yourself rendering the service or delivering the merchandise you intend to exchange for it. Notice what he includes. He refuses to separate money from exchange. The visualization includes the giving, not just the receiving. The subconscious cannot be fed merely an image of possession. It must be fed an image of causation. This is why he repeats that something for nothing is not real. And this is where the method becomes work. Hill warns that the subconscious will not be influenced by instructions given without persistence. 1 reading is not enough. 10 readings are not enough. The instruction must be repeated until it becomes dominant. He also warns that the subconscious cannot be rushed. You cannot force immediate proof. You cannot demand results on a schedule. The method takes time. Faith takes time. The gradual replacement of doubt with certainty takes time. And if you quit before the habit takes hold, you will conclude that the method does not work. That is not the method failing. That is persistence failing. Hill includes another warning: do not rely entirely on reason. Reason, he says, is often faulty and sometimes lazy. The mind tends to produce reasons to wait, reasons to avoid, reasons to postpone. Autosuggestion is designed to keep the desire dominant enough to override that retreat. When a plan emerges, an idea arrives. A way forward becomes clear. Act immediately. Inspiration without action becomes daydreaming. The subconscious produces plans, but those plans require execution. And the longer you wait, the easier it becomes to explain away the idea as impractical. Hill calls autosuggestion the keystone of the entire philosophy. Everything else you study, planning, specialized knowledge, imagination, decision, persistence, must be fed into the subconscious through deliberate suggestion. Without that bridge, the ideas remain scattered on the conscious surface. They never organize an automatic behavior. An automatic behavior is the goal, not willpower, not discipline in the strained sense, but habit, a dominant pattern of thought that shapes action without requiring constant effort. That is what autosuggestion builds. Not affirmations, not positive thinking, a dominant inner state that aligns thought, feeling, and action toward a specific end. And it starts with one instruction, repeated with feeling, until your subconscious accepts it as real. Lecture 5, Specialized Knowledge. The difference between knowing and earning. There is a phrase people love to repeat. Knowledge is power. It sounds true. It feels like wisdom, and it is almost entirely wrong. Knowledge is not power. Knowledge is only potential power. It becomes power only when it is organized into definite plans of action and directed to a definite end. Hill makes this distinction early because he knows it will trip people up. Most people think that if they just knew more, they would succeed more. So they read, they study, they collect information, and they stay broke. Not because they lack intelligence, because they confuse possession with power. Hill points to universities as proof. The faculties of great universities possess in aggregate nearly every form of general knowledge known to civilization. Yet many professors have little money. They specialize in teaching knowledge. They do not specialize in organizing knowledge and directing it toward a definite financial end. That distinction is the entire chapter. Hill then introduces a story that makes his point undeniable. Henry Ford had little schooling. Critics in his era called him ignorant. During a trial, a lawyer tried to prove Ford's ignorance by quizzing him on general knowledge, names, dates, historical facts. Ford's answers were unimpressive. But when the questioning went too far, Ford replied with something that silenced the courtroom. He said he had a row of electric push buttons on his desk, and by pressing the right button, he could summon men who could answer any question he wished concerning the business to which he was devoting his efforts. Then he asked the essential question: why should he clutter his own mind with general knowledge when he has men around him who can supply whatever knowledge he requires? The courtroom recognized this was not the reply of an ignorant man. It was the reply of an educated man, and here Hill redefines education. Education, he says, comes from the Latin word educo, meaning to draw out, to develop from within. An educated man is not someone who has memorized the most facts. An educated man is someone who has so developed the faculties of his mind that he can acquire what he needs without violating the rights of others. Ford did not need to personally store all specialized knowledge. He needed the ability to organize men who possessed it and to direct that knowledge toward definite ends. That is the mastermind principle applied to knowledge itself. So what does this mean for you? First, it means deciding what specialized knowledge you actually need, not what sounds impressive, not what feels intellectual, what you need for the specific purpose you have defined. Purpose determines knowledge, not curiosity, not vanity, purpose. Once you know what knowledge you need, you identify where to get it, your own experience, the experience of others through a mastermind alliance, books, libraries, courses, night schools, home study, experts you can consult, organizations you can join. But Hill repeats the governing rule: knowledge has no value except what comes from its application toward some worthy end. You can possess a degree and still be useless. A degree often represents miscellaneous knowledge. It may signal effort, but it does not guarantee usefulness. Hill also warns against a common illusion. Many people believe the learning period ends when school ends. He calls this a fatal mistake. Schooling, he says, does little more than put one in the way of learning how to acquire practical knowledge. The real work begins after, and successful men never stop acquiring specialized knowledge related to their major purpose. This is why Hill tells the story of the grocer's salesman who loses his job, takes accounting, modernizes his skill, and builds a bookkeeping business serving over 100 merchants. Specialized knowledge plus imagination became a business. Adversity became a stimulus. The beginning of the business was an idea. Hill also attacks a cultural myth: start at the bottom and work your way up. He does not deny that some rise that way, but too many never rise at all. Routine becomes habit. Habit becomes resignation. Starting one or two steps above the bottom is not arrogance. It is strategic positioning, being seen by opportunity, developing the habit of looking outward, not downward. Here is the summary. You do not need to become omniscient. You need to stop confusing information with power, schooling with education, and personal knowledge with the ability to access and organize knowledge. Decide the purpose. Acquire or access the specialized knowledge. Organize it into plans. Apply it. Keep acquiring and refining. And if you cannot acquire it alone, organize others who can. The idea is the main thing. Specialized knowledge can be found just around the corner. Lecture 6, Imagination. The workshop where desire becomes plan. Hill calls imagination the workshop of the mind, and he chooses that word deliberately. A workshop is not a place where one merely dreams. It is where raw material is shaped into usable form. Desire's the impulse. Faith is the condition that steadies the impulse and holds it in place. Autosuggestion is the channel that carries the impulse into the subconscious. Imagination is where the impulse becomes plan. Without this step, desire stays formless. Hill says it directly. Desire is given shape, form, and action through imagination. If desire remains only desire, it is abstract, fleeting, of no value until it is transformed into its physical counterpart. Imagination is the instrument through which that transformation begins. He divides imagination into two kinds. The first is synthetic imagination. This is the ability to take existing concepts, ideas, plans, and rearrange them into new combinations. It creates nothing in the strict sense. It works with the material of experience, education, observation. This is the faculty most people use most of the time. Hill is careful here. Most progress is not birthed from a void. It is formed by recombination, taking what exists and arranging it differently. That is what synthetic imagination does. The second is creative imagination. Here, Hill's language becomes more abstract. He speaks of hunches, inspirations, flashes of insight that seem to arrive from beyond ordinary reasoning. He calls this the channel through which the mind can tune in to something larger than its own experience. Whether you take this literally or as a description of how the subconscious produces insights after prolonged concentration, the practical point is clear. There are moments when ideas arrive whole, as if from beyond the ordinary chain of logic. And these moments tend to occur when desire is strong enough to raise the intensity of attention. Hill then says something you should remember. The creative faculty becomes more alert in proportion to its development through use. Faculties become stronger through exercise. They become dormant through neglect. Imagination is not a rare gift, it is a muscle of mind. And here is the practical instruction. Center attention first on developing synthetic imagination. This is the daily work, taking what you know, what you can access, who you can reach, what you can offer, and arranging these elements into a workable sequence. That is how most plans are formed. Then Hill gives a line that functions like a door. The moment you reduce the statement of your desire and a plan for its realization to writing, you have given concrete form to the intangible desire. Writing is transmutation. It is the first step by which a desire begins to take shape outside the mind and become something that can be acted upon. Hill tells two stories to illustrate the range. The first is the enchanted kettle. An old doctor sells a formula, a kettle, a paddle to a young clerk who stakes his entire savings on a slip of paper. Hill reveals that the kettle becomes the origin of the Coca-Cola empire, but the important part of the story is not the formula. It is the imagination that multiplied the formula into a distribution, marketing, and cultural system. Fortunes grow not from the physical object, but from the imaginative plan that multiplies its reach. The second story is Dr. Frank Gonzalez and the $1 million. Gonzalez had thought for 2 years about wanting $1 million to build an educational institution, but he had done nothing except think. Then he decided he would get the $1 million within a week. He formed a plan, a sermon titled, "What I Would Do If I Had $1 Million." He publicized it. He delivered it with full emotional force. An industrialist in the audience responded and provided the money. Hill highlights the sequence. A desire nursed, a definite decision reached, a definite plan executed, money follows. The money was not the first step, the plan was. And the plan came from imagination. Hill ends the chapter by reminding you that ideas are the beginning points of all fortunes. Ideas are products of imagination. Capability lies in combining specialized knowledge with imagination into organized plans designed to yield riches. The idea is the main thing. Everything else can be found. Lecture 7, Organized Planning, where desire meets reality. Hill opens this chapter with 2 sentences that are not decoration. Success requires no explanations. Failure permits no alibis. He places them here because this is the point where intention must face consequence. Up to now, the work has concerned internal forces: desire, faith, autosuggestion, imagination. Organized planning is where those forces either become effective in the world or remain self-contained and untested. From this point forward, excuses lose their usefulness. Hill reminds you that one of the 6 steps given earlier was the formation of a definite, practical plan. This chapter explains what practical means. A plan, in Hill's usage, is not a sketch or a hope. It is a structure that can be tested, altered, and replaced without abandoning the goal. And here is the first instruction most people resist. You must ally yourself with a group of people sufficient for the creation and execution of your plan using the mastermind principle. Hill does not soften this. He states plainly that compliance is essential. No individual, regardless of intelligence or effort, possesses all the experience, education, imagination, and specialized knowledge required to accumulate a great fortune alone. Planning at scale is collective, but Hill does not describe this alliance as charity or enthusiasm. He immediately adds a condition. Before forming the group, decide what advantages and benefits you will offer each member in return for cooperation. There is no fantasy of unpaid loyalty here. Organized planning is exchange. Anyone who ignores Taonorsa's principle undermines the plan before it begins. Next comes structure. Meetings must be regular, not symbolic, not occasional, regular enough to refine plans through repeated contact. And within those meetings, Hill insists on perfect harmony. He does not say good intentions. He does not say shared goals. He says perfect harmony. Where friction, jealousy, resentment, or concealed competition exists, the mastermind cannot function. Hill treats harmony not as a virtue, as a technical requirement. Then comes one of the most important corrective principles in the book. If a plan does not work, replace it. And if the replacement fails, replace that one too. This sounds obvious. Yet Hill says this is precisely where most people fail. They confuse the failure of a plan with the failure of a goal. When resistance appears, they abandon the desire instead of redesigning the route. They interpret temporary defeat as permanent failure. Hill draws the line sharply. Temporary defeat signals an unsound plan. Permanent failure occurs only when a person stops rebuilding. He says it again. No man is ever whipped until he quits in his own mind. Quitting is not defined by circumstance. It is defined by internal decision. From here, Hill shifts to the most common starting point for wealth accumulation, the sale of personal services. This is deliberate. He knows most people begin with nothing but their ability to serve. Planning, therefore, must apply first to how one markets oneself. He divides people into leaders and followers, not as judgment, but as clarification of function and compensation. Followers cannot reasonably expect the rewards of leadership. Yet Hill insists that nearly all great leaders began as followers, intelligent followers. The ability to follow intelligently is training for leadership. He outlines the attributes of leadership as functional requirements: courage based on self-knowledge, self-control as the basis of influence, justice as the foundation of respect, definiteness of decision, Definiteness of plans, the habit of doing more than paid for. A pleasing personality, sympathy, mastery of detail. Willingness to assume responsibility, cooperation. Each attribute serves a purpose to maintain voluntary cooperation over time. He distinguishes between leadership by consent and leadership by force. History, Hill says, shows that force does not endure. Leadership that survives is leadership followers choose because it aligns with fairness, understanding, and shared benefit. He introduces the QQS formula for service: quality, quantity, and spirit. Quality means efficiency in execution. Quantity means the habit of rendering all the service one is capable of consistently. Spirit means the manner in which service is rendered. Hill stresses that quality and quantity alone are insufficient. Spirit determines durability. Harmful conduct, no matter how productive in the short term, undermines permanence. Then Hill lists 30 causes of failure. Not to shame, but to force self-examination. The list ranges from lack of purpose to procrastination, from indecision to lack of cooperation, from wrong associations to intolerance, from uncontrolled habits to lack of capital. The list is long because Hill wants no refuge in mystery. If a person fails, the cause can be located. He insists on annual self-inventory. Just as merchants take inventory, individuals must analyze themselves. Progress is either forward, stagnant, or backward. Self-analysis reveals which, and he concludes by returning to choice. Opportunity exists in abundance. One may select what to pursue, plan how to pursue it, and execute with persistence. The system does not promise something for nothing. It promises proportionate reward for proportionate service. That is organized planning, the place where desire becomes action coordinated with others. Where excuses end, plans are tested, and persistence proves whether belief was genuine. Lecture 8, Decision. The speed and firmness of choosing. This is where nearly all effort collapses. Not because people lack intelligence, desire, or opportunity, because they delay choosing. Hill states his conclusion without hesitation. Lack of decision stands near the head of the list of causes of failure. This is not opinion. He insists it is fact, drawn from the analysis of more than 25,000 men and women whose efforts ended without result. The adversary is procrastination, not laziness in the crude sense. The habit of postponing choice. Procrastination, in Hill's framing, is not the absence of action. It is the refusal to commit action in a definite direction. One may stay busy and still be procrastinating if decisions are continually deferred, revised, or abandoned. Hill contrasts those who fail with those who succeed by isolating a single behavioral difference. People who accumulate fortunes reach decisions promptly and change them slowly. People who fail reach decisions slowly, if at all, and change them quickly and often. This distinction is central. Hill is not praising stubbornness for its own sake. He is identifying consistency of direction as the stabilizing force that allows plans to survive resistance. He uses Henry Ford to illustrate. Ford's decisiveness earned him a reputation for obstinacy. Hill does not deny that Ford sometimes delayed change longer than others preferred, but he argues that this very firmness produced immense results before adaptation became necessary. In Hill's framework, decisiveness may resemble obstinacy to outsiders, but indecision is always visible to reality. Reality responds to commitment, not to hesitation. Then Hill addresses one of the most corrosive influences on decision: the opinions of others. He calls opinions the cheapest commodities on earth, abundant and freely offered. Those who allow newspapers, neighbors, or social noise to make decisions for them will never transmute their own desire into money. The reason is structural. If decisions are shaped by external opinion, desire is no longer one's own. It becomes diluted, conditional, and unstable. For this reason, Hill advises secrecy, not isolation, discretion. Take no one into confidence except members of the mastermind group, and only those in complete harmony with the purpose. This is not secrecy born of fear. It is protection of direction. Ridicule, even when intended as humor, often destroys confidence at its root. Many people carry inferiority throughout life because a well-meaning voice weakened their resolve at the wrong moment. Hill insists that one already possesses the necessary instrument for decision, one's own mind. If facts are needed, gather them quietly. Those who talk too much, he observes, do little else. Excessive speech replaces observation and reveals plans to those who may unconsciously or deliberately obstruct them. Hill links wisdom with restraint. Genuine knowledge often appears as silence rather than display. Then he gives a practical maxim. Tell the world what you intend to do, but first show it. Decisions that matter do not need applause. They need follow-through. He then places decision within the context of history itself, the signing of the Declaration of Independence, the Emancipation Proclamation, figures who risked everything on a single choice. But his point is not hero worship. His point is that the same quality that shaped nations is available to any person who becomes self-determining. It is not mystical. It is composed of principles already studied: desire, decision, faith, persistence, the mastermind, organized planning. These forces, when aligned, generate momentum that does not recognize failure. Hill closes with a warning. Indecision is a habit acquired early, often reinforced by education systems that reward compliance over choice. Schools rarely teach definiteness of purpose or the habit of decision. As a result, students enter adulthood without the ability to choose a path deliberately. They accept the first job available, not because it is right, because they never learned to decide. 98 out of every 100 wage earners, Hill says, are where they are because they lack the definiteness of decision to plan a position and select an employer. This is not condemnation, it is diagnosis. Without decision, planning cannot occur. Without planning, opportunity remains invisible. All the instructions in the book are useless unless one decides to use them. Decision is not emotion, it is commitment. And from this point forward, Hill's philosophy assumes the reader is willing to choose. Lecture 9. Persistence, the force that keeps everything else from collapsing. This is where it all either holds together or falls apart. Desire may ignite the journey, faith may stabilize it, decision may set it in motion, but persistence is what keeps it alive long enough to matter. Hill defines persistence as sustained effort backed by will. He does not romanticize it. He treats it as a mechanical necessity. Willpower and desire, when properly combined, form a pair that is difficult to stop. This is why men who accumulate great fortunes are often misunderstood as cold or ruthless. Hill argues that what is mistaken for ruthlessness is usually persistence, an unwillingness to abandon a course once it has been chosen. The majority of people surrender their aims at the first sign of resistance. A few do not. These few continue despite opposition, delay, rejection, and ridicule. Hill names Ford, Carnegie, Rockefeller, and Edison Not to elevate them as exceptions, but to show that persistence, not brilliance, separates those who arrive from those who stop short. He uses a simple analogy. Persistence is to character what carbon is to steel. Without it, strength never forms. With it, ordinary material becomes durable. Hill warns that persistence cannot be borrowed or substituted. The entire philosophy requires that the principles be applied continuously, not intermittently. Spasmodic effort produces no lasting result because it never allows the subconscious to accept a definite pattern. Persistence is not dramatic intensity. It is consistency over time. The first test of persistence appears the moment one attempts to follow the 6 steps introduced in the chapter on desire. Most people read them, agree with them, and then return to routine. Hill treats this not as a moral failure, but as evidence that desire has not yet become intense enough to generate momentum. Weak desire produces weak persistence. Strong desire produces endurance. This leads to one of Hill's most repeated principles. The intensity of desire determines the strength of persistence. If persistence is lacking, desire must be strengthened. This is not done through excitement or affirmation alone, but through repeated concentration on a definite purpose until the mind becomes occupied with it. When the subconscious accepts the picture of the goal as real, persistence becomes natural rather than forced. Hill introduces a crucial distinction. Poverty consciousness forms without effort. Money consciousness must be created deliberately. The mind, if left unoccupied, gravitates toward fear, limitation, and retreat. Persistence is required not only to pursue success, but to prevent the mind from defaulting to its lowest energy state. He insists there's no substitute for persistence, not intelligence, not education, not opportunity. Those who develop the habit of persistence appear to carry insurance against failure. They may be defeated temporarily, but they do not accept defeat as final. Life itself tests individuals through discouragement, withholding reward until persistence is demonstrated. Those who endure receive not only their goal, but a deeper compensation. The understanding that failure always contains the seed of an equivalent advantage. To make persistence practical, Hill identifies its causes. Definiteness of purpose gives direction. Desire supplies energy. Self-reliance supports follow-through. Definiteness of plans provides structure. Accurate knowledge removes doubt. Cooperation reinforces effort. Willpower focuses attention. Habit converts effort into automatic behavior. Persistence is not mysterious. It is constructed. He then names the symptoms of its absence: lack of clear purpose, procrastination, indifference to learning, indecision, reliance on excuses, self-satisfaction, compromise, blame shifting, weak desire, eagerness to quit, failure to act on ideas, wishing instead of willing, acceptance of poverty as normal, gambling for shortcuts, and above all, fear of criticism. Hill treats fear of criticism as especially destructive because it often operates unconsciously. It silences ideas before they are spoken. It prevents action before plans are tested. It teaches people to imitate rather than originate. When Andrew Carnegie suggested that Hill devote 20 years to organizing a philosophy of success, Hill's first reaction was fear of ridicule, fear of inadequacy, fear of ambition itself. His mind produced excuses instantly. Hill reveals this to demonstrate how ideas are often strangled at birth. Fear of criticism prevents ideas from reaching the planning stage. Persistence is what carries them past that vulnerable moment. He reinforces the idea that favorable breaks are not accidents. Breaks can be made through persistence. W.C. Fields, Marie Dressler, Eddie Cantor all experienced collapse and later resurgence. What remained when money, reputation, and opportunity vanished was persistence. They created their own breaks by continuing to act after others would have stopped. Hill reduces persistence to 4 steps: a definite purpose backed by burning desire, a definite plan expressed through continuous action, a mind closed to negative influence, and a supportive alliance that encourages follow through. These 4 steps, he says, are the essence of the 13 principles, and he closes with a question he believes most people cannot answer. What power gives persistence its force? He does not answer directly. He states only what his observation confirms. Those who persist eventually gain access to an invisible support that those who quit never encounter. Whether one calls this infant intelligence, subconscious alignment, or natural law is less important than the fact that it responds only after persistence is demonstrated. Lecture 10, The Mastermind, the Power that Multiplies Everything. Hill now takes everything we have covered and places it under one requirement that cannot be avoided if the aim is large: power. He begins with a statement that removes confusion. Plans are inert. A plan, even a good plan, does nothing until it is driven by sufficient power to translate it into action. This is why, in Hill's structure, organized planning and the mastermind principle belong together. Planning is the design, power is the force that moves the design through resistance. Hill defines power in a way that matters. Power is organized and intelligently directed knowledge, not knowledge as information stored. Knowledge coordinated into action. When Hill says power in this chapter, he means organized effort. 2 or more people coordinated toward a definite end in a spirit of harmony. He is not describing personality dominance. He is describing organized cooperation. He makes 2 claims that he treats as non-negotiable: powers required to accumulate money, powers required to retain money after it has been accumulated. In other words, the same forces that create wealth also stabilize it. Without power, one may stumble into an opportunity, but one cannot hold it when conditions change, competition arises, or decisions must be made quickly at scale. Then Hill gives the definition of mastermind that he will use throughout: coordination of knowledge and effort in a spirit of harmony between 2 or more people for a definite purpose. This is not merely teamwork, it is coordination plus harmony plus purpose. The definition is tight because Hill is trying to separate the mastermind from ordinary association, where people gather without shared direction, without compensation, without structure, and without harmony. He states the principle in absolute terms. No individual may have great power without availing himself of the mastermind. He reinforces this by returning to the instruction given earlier: form a group and perfect plans together. If done with persistence, intelligence, and careful selection, the objective will be half reached before one recognizes it. This is not exaggeration within his system. He believes that the moment a person stops operating as a solitary unit and begins operating as a coordinated intelligence, progress accelerates. Hill distinguishes 2 characteristics of the mastermind: economic and psychic. The economic is obvious. A person surrounded by counsel, advice, and cooperation, offered in harmony, gains practical advantages. This kind of alliance has been the basis of nearly every great fortune. The alliance multiplies skills and reduces error. It creates reach that no single person could create alone. The psychic phase is where Hill's language becomes more abstract. He says that when 2 minds come together, they create a third intangible force that may be likened to a third mind. 2 people thinking together in harmony often produce ideas neither would have produced alone. The meeting creates something emergent, an increase in thought energy, a higher level of insight, a sharper plan, a stronger resolve. Hill calls it a third mind. He uses Andrew Carnegie as the anchor. Carnegie's mastermind group consisted of roughly 50 men organized for the definite purpose of manufacturing and marketing steel. Carnegie attributed his fortune to the power he accumulated through this mastermind. Hill urges you to analyze any person of great fortune and notice the pattern. Consciously or unconsciously, they employed a mastermind. He states again that great power can be accumulated through no other principle. This is Hill declaring hierarchy within his system. Mastermind is not a useful addition. It is the engine of scale. He then introduces a metaphor that makes the point easier to grasp. The brain is compared to an electric battery. A group of batteries provides more energy than a single one. Likewise, a group of brains coordinated in harmony provides more thought energy than a single brain. When a group of brains are coordinated in harmony, the increased energy becomes available to every brain in the group. Association does not merely add separate contributions. It elevates each member's capacity. He illustrates this with Henry Ford. Ford began in poverty, illiteracy, and ignorance, and overcame these rapidly. Hill directs attention to the period when Ford became personally acquainted with Edison, then later formed friendships with Firestone, Burroughs, and Burbank. Hill's argument is that Ford absorbed the vibrations of thought, intelligence, experience, and knowledge through close association in harmony. Ford increased himself by his environment, deliberately chosen. Then Hill turns to Gandhi as an illustration of power without conventional tools. Gandhi's power came from inducing 200 million people to coordinate in harmony for a definite purpose. Hill calls this a miracle, not because it violates natural law, but because it is so rare to witness harmony maintained at that scale without force. Anyone who has managed employees knows how difficult it is to achieve even a small measure of harmony. Calvin's accomplishment therefore illustrates the highest form of mastermind power, voluntary cooperation sustained by shared purpose and belief. Hill returns to money with a final observation. Money is shy and elusive. It must be wooed. The power used to woo money is mixed with faith, desire, persistence, and applied through plans set into action. Money responds to coordinated, sustained, emotionally backed action, not to casual wishing. He ends with a blunt distinction. Poverty needs no plan. It is bold and ruthless. It takes the place of riches easily. Riches are shy and timid. They must be attracted. An attraction, in Hill's vocabulary, means deliberate preparation of mind, definite planning, organized action, and the power that comes from coordinated effort. Power in Hill's system is not force. It is organized knowledge in action, multiplied through harmony with other minds. The mastermind is the method by which an individual gains that multiplication. Lecture 11, Sex Transmutation, the strongest force. Most people waste. This is the chapter people either misunderstand, misuse, or skip entirely. Hill opens it by tightening the entire system again. Anybody can wish for riches. Most people do, but wishing is not a method. A definite plan plus a burning desire is the only dependable means he recognizes. With that reminder in place, he introduces a subject he believes most people misunderstand so thoroughly that they lose one of the strongest forces available to disciplined achievement: sex. He begins by defining his term. To transmute is to change or transfer one form of energy into another. Hill is not using the word poetically. He is using it as a functional description. He is preparing you to see sex not merely as a physical act, but as an emotion that generates a state of mind and therefore generates energy that can be directed. Then he names the central problem. Because of ignorance, This state of mind has been associated almost entirely with the physical. And because most people have learned about sex through improper influence, silence, shame, rumor, or crude instruction, the mind becomes biased toward physical expression as the only outlet. Hill's aim is to widen the understanding. He is not trying to suppress sex. He is trying to describe its potentialities and the consequences of misdirection. He states that sex emotion contains three constructive possibilities: the perpetuation of mankind, the maintenance of health, and the transformation of mediocrity into genius through transmutation. This third claim is the one he intends to develop at length. Hill's position is clear. Sex energy is the strongest of human desires, and therefore the strongest stimulus to action. That power can either be spent in a narrow channel or redirected into broader creative channels. He makes a clear observation. When driven by sex desire, men develop courage, keenness of imagination, willpower, persistence, and creative ability that may be absent in them at other times. The desire is so intense that men risk reputation and even life for its expression. Hill's argument is that the attributes stirred by sex desire do not disappear when the desire is redirected. They can be harnessed. When the mind is switched from physical expression to another form of pursuit, literature, art, invention, enterprise, the intensity remains, but the outlet changes. This is sex transmutation, as Hill means it, switching the mind from one channel of expression to another without destroying the energy. He insists that this requires willpower, but he also insists the desire should not be eliminated. It is inborn. It should not be repressed, because repression, in his view, behaves like a river dammed without a proper channel. Pressure builds and eventually it breaks through in less worthy outlets. Hill's emphasis is not on denial but on redirection, outlets that enrich body, mind, and spirit. He then makes two claims drawn from his study of biography. Men of great achievement tend to have highly developed sex natures and have learned transmutation. And many men of fortune and recognition were motivated by the influence of a woman. Hill is careful to frame this as influence and stimulus, not as dependency or manipulation. He is describing the way certain emotions step up the mind's vibration and thereby step up action. He then introduces what he calls the 10 mind stimuli. These are influences that raise the mind to high rates of vibration: enthusiasm, creative imagination, intense desire. He places sex expression first, followed by love, desire for fame or financial gain, music, friendship, master-mind alliance, mutual suffering, autosuggestion, fear, and narcotics and alcohol. He calls 8 of these constructive and 2 destructive. The point of the list is not to encourage stimulation for its own sake. It is to show comparative intensity and to argue that sex is the strongest natural stimulant. From that, he builds his definition of genius. Genius, in Hill's framing, is not odd behavior or social eccentricity. It is the ability to raise the vibration of thought to the point where one can communicate with sources of knowledge not available at the ordinary rate of thought. This is Hill tying sex transmutation directly to creative imagination and what he calls the sixth sense. He confronts the social distortion that surrounds sex. People treat a highly sexed nature as something suspicious rather than blessed, and this produces inferiority complexes and confusion. He warns again that this chapter is not justification for libertinism. Sex energy is a virtue only when used intelligently and with discrimination. Misused, it debases body and mind. Overindulgence can become as destructive as drink or narcotics and can damage reason, willpower, even sanity. Hill's thrust is consistent. Energy without control becomes ruin. Energy with discipline becomes power. He then shifts into a broader meditation on love, romance, and sex as a triangle of achievement-building genius. Love acts as a safety valve that brings balance and poise. Sex alone can produce a cyclone, action without sanity. Love mixed with sex produces steadier judgment. Hill argues that genuine reformation of character comes through heart change, not head change, and love reforms where sex alone does not. Throughout this chapter, Hill is doing something specific. He's taking the strongest natural stimulant he knows, showing its destructive outlets when uncontrolled, and insisting that its highest value appears when it is redirected into creative work and disciplined pursuit. He is not telling you to chase sex. He is telling you to understand the force already present, to stop treating it as either shameful or purely physical, and to learn to convert it into sustained, constructive effort. That is the 10th step. A driving force that amplifies imagination, persistence, and the sixth sense when transmuted, and destroys balance when dissipated. Lecture 12. The subconscious mind, the connecting link between thought and action. Hill calls the subconscious mind the connecting link. He means that quite literally. Desire begins in the conscious mind as an impulse. Plans are shaped in imagination. Faith steadies the impulse. Autosuggestion carries it inward. Persistence keeps the process from breaking. But the conversion of intention into automatic movement, into the kind of steady action that continues while you are tired, distracted, or discouraged, is attributed in Hill's system to the subconscious. He begins with a definition that is meant to be practical, not mysterious. The subconscious mind is a field of consciousness in which every thought, impulse, and sense, impression that reaches the objective mind through the five senses is classified and recorded, and from which impressions can be recalled like documents from a filing cabinet. Nothing is simply gone. Much is stored whether you intend it or not. Hill then states the rule that carries through the chapter. The subconscious receives and files impressions regardless of their nature. It does not ask whether they are helpful. It does not ask whether they are destructive. It takes what it is given. From this comes his second rule. You may voluntarily plant in the subconscious any plan, thought, or purpose you wish translated into its physical or monetary equivalent. The subconscious acts first on dominating desires mixed with emotional feelings, such as faith. This is why Hill keeps insisting on emotionalization. The subconscious is not moved by cold reasoning alone. It is moved by feeling. If desire is weak, inconsistent, or spoken without belief, it does not become dominant enough to govern the subconscious. But if desire is clear, repeated, and emotionalized, especially with faith, it becomes a governing influence. Hill repeats one of his most emphatic claims: the subconscious works day and night. It does not rest when the conscious mind rests. Through a method unknown to man, it draws upon infinite intelligence for power to transmute desire into physical equivalents, always using the most practical media available. The phrase "most practical media" matters. Hill is trying to prevent you from expecting supernatural delivery. Even when he uses metaphysical language, he keeps tying outcomes to practical channels, plans, actions, alliances, opportunities, the movements of people in the world. He introduces a necessary boundary. You cannot entirely control the subconscious mind, but you can voluntarily hand over to it any plan, desire, or purpose you wish transformed into concrete form. This is partial control. You cannot stop the subconscious from functioning, but you can influence what it works upon by deliberately feeding it selected material. And he warns you not to be discouraged if the first attempt produces nothing. The subconscious is directed through habit. Habit requires time. Faith itself has not yet been mastered by the reader on first pass. Hill insists on patience and persistence as part of the method, not as mere encouragement. Then comes a warning that sits at the center of this chapter. The subconscious will not remain idle. If you do not plant desires deliberately, it will feed on whatever reaches it through neglect. Since thought impulses are always arriving from environment, from the senses, from one's own past impressions, and in Hill's view from other minds, neglect is itself a form of instruction. A neglected mind is still being trained. It is simply being trained by accident. Hill then introduces what he calls the language of the subconscious. Emotion. He offers an analogy. Emotion is like yeast in bread. It is the action element that transforms passive material into active expansion. A thought without emotion may sit inert. A thought mixed with emotion begins to move. From this, he draws a practical requirement. If you wish to influence the inner audience of the subconscious, you must speak in feeling, not in sterile words. He presents the 7 major positive emotions: desire, faith, love, sex, enthusiasm, romance, hope, and the 7 major negative emotions: fear, jealousy, hatred, revenge, greed, superstition, anger. He calls the positives the ones that must be injected deliberately through autosuggestion. He calls the negatives the ones that inject themselves voluntarily. This is one of his central explanations for why most people drift downward without effort and must work deliberately to move upward. The negatives come naturally and seize the mind if the mind is not occupied. The positives must be cultivated and installed as dominating influences. Hill insists that positive and negative emotions cannot occupy the mind at the same time. One must dominate. Therefore, it becomes the individual's responsibility to cultivate the positive until they become habitual. Once they dominate through habit, the negatives cannot enter in the same way. He is not claiming you will never feel fear again. He is claiming that fear cannot govern a mind that has been trained to default into faith, purpose, and constructive feeling. Then he gives a severe warning. The presence of a single negative in the conscious mind is sufficient to destroy chances of constructive aid from the subconscious. When you attempt to give an instruction to the subconscious through prayer, through auto-suggestion, through visualization, if the instruction is saturated with fear or doubt, then fear and doubt are what will be passed inward and acted upon. The method does not discriminate. It amplifies the dominant emotion in the instruction. This is why Hill speaks at length about prayer. Most people resort to prayer only after everything else has failed, and therefore they approach prayer with fear and doubt. If fear is present while praying, the prayer is in vain. Not because the universe is cruel, but because fear is the substance being communicated. Hill closes with the sentence that underlies the entire chapter. Faith and fear cannot coexist in the same instruction. They are poor bedfellows. Where one is found, the other cannot exist. Therefore, if the individual wishes constructive aid from the subconscious, the individual must cultivate faith as the emotional base of instruction and drive fear out of the dominant position through habit. That is the 11th step. The subconscious mind is the storehouse, the executor, the translator, and the channel through which dominant emotionalized desires are converted into practical movement. Lecture 13, The Brain. The broadcasting and receiving station of Thought Hill now turns from the subconscious mind as a connecting link to the physical instrument he believes makes that link operational. He calls the brain a broadcasting and receiving station for thought. He is not using this as metaphor only. He is presenting it as a working model, an explanation for why minds influence minds, why ideas seem to travel, why the mastermind principle produces more than the sum of its parts, and why creative imagination behaves, at times, like a receiver tuned to something outside ordinary reasoning. He begins by invoking his own observation. Every human brain both broadcasts and receives thought vibration. Hill anchors the claim in the radio principle because radio provides a known example of invisible transmission. Just as sound is converted to a form that can travel through the ether and then converted back into sound, Hill suggests that thought is energy traveling at a rate of vibration, and that the brain is the apparatus through which this energy is transmitted and received. He ties this model directly to imagination. Creative imagination is the receiving set. It picks up thought vibrations released by other brains. It is also the agency of communication between the conscious, reasoning mind and the sources from which thought stimuli may be received. Hill wants you to see that creative imagination is not merely the ability to invent internally. It is, in his framework, the faculty that becomes receptive when the mind's vibration is stepped up. This stepping up occurs through emotion. Positive emotions and negative emotions both increase the vibration of thought. When the mind is stimulated to a higher rate, it becomes more receptive to thought vibrations reaching it through the ether. Hill insists that only very high-rate vibrations are carried from one brain to another. Ordinary thought, unmodified by emotion, does not carry with the same intensity. Thought mixed with emotion vibrates at a higher rate and is therefore capable of transmission. He returns here to sex because he just spent an entire chapter arguing that sex is the most powerful stimulant. The brain stimulated by sex vibrates more rapidly than when the emotion is absent. The result of sex transmutation is that thoughts are raised to such a pitch that creative imagination becomes highly receptive to ideas picked up from the ether. And at the same time, heightened vibration gives one's own thoughts the feeling essential for influencing the subconscious mind. Here, Hill is creating a bridge between several chapters at once. The brain broadcast model is his explanation for two related processes. One is receiving ideas, hunches, inspirations that appear to come from beyond ordinary reasoning. The other is sending, the way emotionalized thought is passed inward to the subconscious and outward into the environment through action. He assigns roles within the broadcasting apparatus. The subconscious mind is the sending station. Creative imagination is the receiving set. Autosuggestion is the medium by which the station is put into operation. This is Hill tightening the whole system again. Desire initiates. Autosuggestion transmits. Emotion supplies power. The subconscious executes. Creative imagination receives. And the brain is the physical instrument through which the exchange is possible. He then argues that the greatest forces are intangible. Man has depended too heavily on the senses, and therefore has limited knowledge to what can be weighed and measured. Thought, Hill says, is the greatest of these intangibles, and man understands it least. He claims that his own work with members of his staff has discovered ideal conditions under which the sixth sense can function practically. Those conditions are not solitude or trance. They are a close working alliance among a small group in harmony, discussing a definite problem. By blending three minds into one through discussion, each participant becomes connected with sources of knowledge outside his own experience. This is one of the most important passages in the chapter because it returns the entire discussion to something operational. Whether you accept Hill's ether language literally or treat it as a model for how collective thinking produces emergent insight, the method is concrete: a defined problem, harmonized minds, disciplined discussion, and the capture of ideas that arise beyond the individual's usual reach. This is the practical application of the master mind. The brain, in Hill's philosophy, is the instrument through which the intangible becomes coordinated within the self and between people. Lecture 14, The Sixth Sense. The Temple of Wisdom Hill opens this final principle by placing it in its historical setting. He calls the Depression a blessing in disguise because it reduced the world to a new starting point. It broke the illusion that securities automatically forced people back to fundamentals. He uses this as an entry because the sixth sense, as he describes it, is not a convenience for comfortable times. It is presented as the faculty that becomes meaningful when conditions are uncertain and when ordinary reasoning, ordinary routines, and ordinary confidence are insufficient. He calls the sixth sense the door to the temple of wisdom. He also calls it the 13th step toward riches. But he adds a limit immediately. This principle is the apex of the philosophy and can be understood and applied only after the other 12 principles have been mastered. Hill is signaling that the sixth sense is not a shortcut and not a starting point. It is not a substitute for desire, faith, autosuggestion, planning, decision, persistence, and the mastermind. It is what becomes available after those have been disciplined into habit. He defines the sixth sense as that portion of the subconscious mind he has been calling creative imagination, the receiving set through which ideas, plans, and thoughts flash into the mind. He acknowledges the language people use for these flashes, hunches, inspirations, but he refuses to reduce the faculty to a simple explanation. He says it defies description, not because it is theatrical, but because it cannot be described to someone who has no experience of it. Understanding comes only by mind development from within, through meditation and sustained practice. Hill then makes his central claim. The sixth sense is probably the medium of contact between the finite mind and infinite intelligence. For this reason, it is a mixture of mental and spiritual, the point at which the human mind contacts the universal mind. He tells you that after mastery of the preceding principles, you will be prepared to accept a statement that otherwise would seem incredible. That the sixth sense warns of danger in time to avoid it and notifies of opportunity in time to embrace it. He uses the phrase guardian angel, but even here, he does not present miracles as violations of law. He says he does not advocate miracles because nature does not deviate from her laws. Some laws are simply incomprehensible to the average mind and therefore appear miraculous. The sixth sense appears like a miracle only because he does not understand the method by which it operates. Then he shifts into the most unusual section of the book, the invisible counselors. Hill describes a practice he did nightly for years, an imagined council meeting with 9 men whose lives impressed him. Emerson, Paine, Edison, Darwin, Lincoln, Burbank, Napoleon, Ford, and Carnegie. He seated them around a table and acted as chairman. His purpose was to rebuild his character into a composite of the traits he admired, to overcome the handicap of his environment through voluntary rebirth. He frames it as autosuggestion applied in a concentrated, dramatic form. He was speaking aloud to his subconscious mind, asking for the qualities he associated with each figure: understanding of nature, patience in cause and effect, courage to express convictions, persistence, organized effort. Hill reports something that startled him. The figures began to seem real. They developed individual characteristics. They behaved in ways he did not consciously script. He became frightened and stopped, then resumed. He eventually expanded his cabinet to more than 50 figures. He acknowledges that he has never before had the courage to describe this practice publicly because he feared misunderstanding. But he insists that the meetings led him into creative paths, rekindled appreciation for greatness, and encouraged honest thought. This long confession has a purpose within Hill's structure. He is showing what he believes the sixth sense looks like in lived experience. A mind deliberately stimulated, disciplined, focused, then open to guidance that arrives as if from beyond the ordinary self. Whether you accept the counselors as pure auto-suggestion or as something more, Hill's instruction remains consistent with the rest of the book. He's describing a method of mental stimulation and deliberate internal consultation that produces ideas and warnings in times of difficulty. He draws an important boundary. The sixth sense will interest those who seek vast wealth, but it is not necessary for those with modest aims. Ford used it. Edison used it, especially when working beyond known experience. Great leaders and religious founders understood it and perhaps used it continuously. But the sixth sense cannot be worn like a tool at will. It comes slowly through application of the other principles. It rarely becomes workable before 40, and more often not until after 50, because the spiritual forces related to it mature only through years of meditation and serious thought. Then Hill offers reassurance. One can profit from the book without understanding the sixth sense, especially if the aim is money or material things. The chapter is included because Hill wants the philosophy to be complete, not merely profitable. Money, in Hill's view, is not the finishing point. Understanding is. Understanding of self, others, laws of nature, and happiness. That kind of understanding comes in fullness only through familiarity with the sixth sense. He gives a practical instruction disguised as a gentle suggestion. Return to the chapter after a month and read it again. Notice that your mind rises to a higher level of stimulation. Repeat this periodically without worrying about how much you learn each time. Eventually, you will find yourself in possession of a power that helps you throw off discouragement, master fear, overcome procrastination, and draw freely upon imagination. The pattern is consistent: repetition without haste, gradual internal development, and eventual functional change. Lecture 15, The Six Ghosts of Fear, the final barrier to everything you have learned. Hill closes the book by doing something deliberate and uncompromising. He removes every remaining place where you can hide. Up to this point, the philosophy has shown how desire becomes reality. Through faith, auto-suggestion, planning, decision, persistence, the mastermind, and the higher faculties of the mind. Now Hill addresses the final barrier that makes all of that knowledge useless if it remains unchallenged: fear. He begins with a hard rule. Before any part of this philosophy can work, three enemies must be eliminated: indecision, doubt, and fear. Indecision is the seed, doubt is the growth, fear is the fully formed force. These three work quietly. They rarely announce themselves. They develop slowly, often below conscious awareness, which is why they are so dangerous. Hill's aim in this final chapter is not comfort, it is diagnosis. He identifies 6 basic fears that account for nearly all human suffering, limitation, and failure: fear of poverty, fear of criticism, fear of ill health, fear of loss of love, fear of old age, fear of death. Most people suffer from several at once. Some carry all 6. Hill emphasizes that fear is not an external force, it is a state of mind. And because it is a state of mind, it can be controlled, but only if it is first recognized. Fear of poverty is the most destructive. It does not simply make people cautious. It destroys imagination, initiative, enthusiasm, self-reliance, decision-making, persistence, and even personality. It causes people to accept less than they want, less than they need, and less than they are capable of earning. This fear thrives in environments of scarcity thinking and spreads socially. Hill points directly to the Great Depression as proof that mass fear becomes physical reality. There's no compromise between poverty and riches. The roads run in opposite directions. Accepting poverty mentally is the first and final step toward receiving it physically. Fear of criticism is subtle and socially reinforced. It silences ideas before they are spoken. It prevents action before plans are tested. It teaches people to imitate rather than originate. Hill shows how this fear controls behavior through fashion, conformity, religion, career choices, and even speech patterns. Most people would rather live unfulfilled than risk being criticized. Parents, teachers, employers, and peers often plant this fear early, sometimes permanently. By repeated negative suggestion, the cost of fear of criticism is initiative. Without initiative, no success is possible. Fear of ill health begins in the mind, not the body. Hill draws a sharp distinction. Most illness begins as fear, not disease. He cites hypochondria, imaginary illness, as a major cause of real physical breakdown. Fear weakens resistance. Expectation produces symptoms. Worry creates vulnerability. This fear is heavily reinforced by sensational headlines, patent medicine advertising, obsession with symptoms, and constant discussion of illness. Hill does not deny physical disease. He denies the value of living mentally inside disease. A fearful mind creates a sick body more often than a sick body creates a fearful mind. Fear of loss of love manifests as jealousy, suspicion, emotional manipulation, reckless spending, gambling, and loss of self-control. It originates from deep biological insecurity and social conditioning. Hill notes that this fear is often more intense in women, but is destructive to both sexes. The irony is that fear of losing love often destroys love. This fear leads people to abandon reason, dignity, and long-term judgment in exchange for short-term emotional security. Fear of old age is largely false and inherited. The greatest productive years of the human mind, Hill says, are between 40 and 60. Yet society teaches people to slow down, withdraw, and diminish themselves just as wisdom, judgment, and balance mature. Fear of old age is fueled by fear of poverty, fear of illness, fear of diminished attractiveness, and fear of loss of independence. Hill reframes aging not as decline, but as mental harvest season if one refuses the fear narrative. Fear of death is treated with unusual clarity. Hill traces it primarily to religious fanaticism, superstition, and fear-based conditioning rather than reason or evidence. His argument is simple. Life is energy. Energy cannot be destroyed. Death, therefore, is transition, not annihilation. Even if death were nothing more than eternal sleep, it would not justify terror. The greatest antidote to fear of death is purpose. A person with a burning desire and useful work has no time to fear dying. Beyond the 6 fears, Hill identifies a 7th evil: susceptibility to negative influence. This is the soil in which all failure grows. Negative influence comes from friends, family, news, culture, habitual pessimists, and one's own unguarded thinking. Because thoughts spread through emotional vibration, fear is contagious. One fearful mind infects another. Hill is blunt. Those who accumulate riches protect their minds. Those who remain poor do not. He ends where he began, with absolute responsibility. You control one thing completely, your thoughts. Everything else flows from that. If you do not control your mind, you will control nothing else. If you master your mind, you can shape your destiny. Alibis are exposed as the final enemy. Hill lists dozens of them. If I had more time, if I had money, if I had a break, and dismantles them all with one truth. Alibis explain failure. They never create success. The philosophy leaves no refuge. No excuses remain. Hill's closing challenge is simple. You now possess the key. It is not material. It is mental. It costs nothing to use and everything not to. The reward is not just money. It is self-mastery. And self-mastery is the foundation of all freedom. That is why he ends the book not with comfort, but with a question. Will you use it? And with that, the philosophy closes, not as a promise, but as a test. Closing: what to do now. You have just heard the entire philosophy, not as decoration, not as entertainment, as a system. The question is not whether you understood it. You did. The question is whether you will apply it. Most people will not. They will read this, feel something shift, and then return to routine. Within a week, the ideas will have faded into memory. Within a month, they will be stories they used to find interesting. That is what happens to information that is consumed without being acted upon. Hill knew this. That is why he kept repeating the same instructions. Not because he thought you were slow, because he understood how minds work. Information without repetition becomes dust. Repetition without emotion becomes noise. Emotion without action becomes fantasy. Action without persistence becomes scattered motion, and persistence without organization becomes exhaustion. The system works only when all the parts work together. So let me leave you with one instruction. If you intend to use this material, start with the 6 steps in the chapter on desire. Write your statement, read it aloud, do it every morning, do it every night. Do not wait until you believe it. Belief will follow practice. Do not wait until you feel ready. Readiness follows motion. Do not wait until the conditions improve. Conditions respond to commitment. Start now, not tomorrow, not after you think about it. Now, and if you find yourself hesitating, go back to the chapter on fear. Find which ghost is running the show. Name it, expose it, and then decide whether you want that ghost making decisions for the rest of your life. This is not about money. It never was. It is about becoming the kind of person who can achieve what they set out to achieve. Money is just what happens when that kind of person exists. Hill gave you the method. The rest is yours. End of Think and Grow Rich. A practical guide